is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Muteli Edwards. Tonight's top stories. Pakistan vows to settle the score after India launched deadly missile strikes on terrorist targets inside its territory, with Islamabad calling New Delhi's move an act of war. The United States and China set for their first significant trade talks since a standoff over tariffs began last month. A Chinese monetary policy is eased to boost an ailing economy that's struggling with a weak consumption and the U.S. trade war. President Xi Jinping hails China's ties with Russia as he heads to Moscow in a show of support for leader Vladimir Putin. And a South Korean court postpones the retrial of leading opposition presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung, clearing his run for the country's top job. Also on the bulletin, cardinals from around the world gather for a special mass at the Vatican ahead of a secretive conclave to choose the next pope. Pakistan says India has, quote, ignited an inferno in the region after New Delhi ordered strikes against targets in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir, killing at least 31 people. While Islamabad adds that New Delhi will be held fully responsible for the consequences. The attack marks one of the most serious military escalations between the nuclear-armed rivals in years. Well, New Delhi said its strikes were precise and intelligence-led, targeting what it calls terrorist camps in 9 locations in Pakistan. Indian officials say no Pakistani military sites were hit and that civilian casualties were avoided. Now, the strikes come 2 weeks after a deadly terror attack in Indian-administered Kashmir that killed 26 civilians.
India exercised its right to respond and preempt as well as deter more such cross-border attacks. These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India.
Pakistani officials say half a dozen sites were hit in the Indian strikes, including the city of Muzaffarabad. While they deny any militant camps were present. A military spokesperson told Reuters 5 Indian fighter jets were shot down, though India has not confirmed this.
Pakistan reserves the right and will respond to this aggression at a time, place and means of our own choice.
Meanwhile, more than 24 international flights have been rerouted for safety, with dozens more cancelled. Airlines avoiding Pakistani airspace include Taiwan's EVA Air, Korean Air, Thai Airways and Singapore Airlines. Well, Neha Punya in New Delhi and Hira Mustafa in Islamabad joining us live right now. First to you, Hira, walk us through some of the key takeaways from Pakistan's National Security Committee meeting.
Well, the National Security meeting has just concluded, and after that, the Prime Minister has convened a cabinet meeting that will be taking place at 11 GMT. And right after that meeting, Pakistan's Prime Minister will be addressing the nation. In the National Security meeting, Pakistan's federal ministers, along with the top military officials, participated, and they were briefed about the security situation along the line of control, the defective border that separates Pakistan-administered Kashmir from Indian-administered Kashmir. And the key takeaways from this national security meeting is that the Pakistani authorities has deliberated that under Article 51 of UN Charter, Pakistan has the right to defend. And in that context, the Pakistani authorities have authorize the armed forces to undertake the corresponding actions in this regard. That means that Pakistan will retaliate in coming days, and we have seen this sentiment being echoed by the country's military spokesperson earlier in a day, in which he has stated that Pakistan will respond whenever it wants, and at the right time it will hit back to India. Experts say this does not come as a surprise, as we do know that the national security session was convened under emergency measures, as India, over the course of night, has launched 3 missiles in Pakistan-administered Kashmir and Pakistan's Punjab province. So this was imminent that such strong reactions will be coming out from the national security meeting. Also, Pakistan has categorically rejected India's claim that India has targeted the terrorist camps in Pakistan's Punjab province, while Pakistan's stance is that India has launched the cross-border strikes at the civilian areas, and they're claiming that 46 people have been injured as a result of these cross-border strikes, and 26 people have reported have lost their lives. So situation is pretty tense in the capital, as we are hearing strong statements coming out from the defense minister from this national security meeting. And there are also reports that Pakistan earlier in the day has taken a team of United Nations to the areas in Muzaffarabad that are being hit by India.
Right, Neha, let's bring you in here. India strikes on Pakistan. What's the latest on that? And also, what are some of the next steps New Delhi will be planning to take?
Well, there's an uneasy calm here in New Delhi as the Indian government and the government machinery monitors comments coming out of Islamabad. There's been a series of developments in the last few hours, including Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi holding a full cabinet meeting where he briefed his cabinet members on the military operation that was conducted overnight, targeting 9 terror camps, India says, inside Pakistani territory. He's also met the president of the country and briefed her on the military operation as well. Sources in the government say that Prime Minister Narendra Modi was overseeing real-time updates as that operation was executed overnight. India standing firm in its resolve that it had the right to respond, said it was acting preemptively, not just to deter any future attacks, but it had intelligence. It said that more attacks were being planned against India by terror groups that operate inside Pakistan. It said that its intelligence inputs ensured that these were very targeted, very precise attacks to ensure that there would be no collateral damage, no civilians would be caught in the crosshairs of an attack like this. But we've also seen now the government call an all-party meeting for Thursday where opposition leaders will be briefed on what's happened and what the next steps will look like. India's Home Ministry, which is in charge of internal security, has asked paramilitary forces to return from leave and to be on standby. We're also seeing the Home Minister of the country briefing, chief ministers of the various Indian states on the next steps. And, the Indian NSA has also been speaking to world leaders, including China's Wang Yi, and he's told Beijing that India is well prepared to retaliate should Pakistan decide to escalate, but it has no plans to ensure this escalates any further.
Now, Hira, you mentioned earlier that the mood in Pakistan and in Pakistan-administered Kashmir is tense. No surprise there. And some statements expected from officials there. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, absolutely. Tensions are running high since last night. And in fact, from past couple of days, we have seen some provocative statements from both sides of the border. Therefore, the community that is living along the line of control, the de facto border that separates the Kashmir region, people are anxious and they're nervous given the fact that India has launched 3 missile attacks in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. So the security
Well, I'm afraid, we can't quite. Maybe I should turn to you, Neha, instead. Actually, Hira might be back on again. Right, maybe not quite. Let's just go to Neha. Walk us through the public sentiment in India to the strikes in Pakistan.
You know, Tali, for a few days now, there's been significant pressure on the Indian government to do something in response to that terror attack in Kashmir that killed 26 people. It's one of the worst attacks on civilians that India has seen in nearly 2 decades. And there have been calls cutting across quarters, asking for the government to retaliate, to avenge the loss of those innocent lives. And a majority of Indians who've woken up to news of the military strike have welcomed this. They see this as India's attempt to defend itself, not as a provocative action as Pakistan is calling it. You also have to understand the history between India and Pakistan. These are, these are bitter neighbors and rivals. They fought 3 wars. In the last 70 years, they've had several moments of conflict and tensions, the last one being in 2019 when India had similarly carried out airstrikes inside Pakistan when 40 Indian soldiers were killed in another terror attack. And that strike was also welcomed because many Indians view the issue of terrorism, especially in Kashmir, as a problem that they blame Pakistan for, something that the Indian government has also echoed, not just in its comments in the aftermath of the attack, but also in its comments while briefing world leaders, speaking at international forums. Many people have been tweeting patriotic hashtags. They've been talking about how this is the right move by a country that has been a victim of terrorism for many, many years. But there are also others who are calling for caution, saying this is not the time for a broader conflict. That it will have far-reaching repercussions on ordinary Indians. I think the most immediately impacted the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Border areas have seen, heavy shelling overnight, many of them forced to leave their homes. Schools there have been shut. So civilian life also being impacted as tensions mount.
Hey, many thanks for that report, Neha Punya in New Delhi and Hira Mustafa in Islamabad. All right, a look now at the equity markets in both the countries. The Indian benchmarks holding steady after opening 0.7% lower, while Pakistan's benchmark KSE 30 index down about 2% this hour after slumping as much as 6% earlier. Well, the escalating conflict between India and Pakistan has drawn international concern. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for restraint from both countries, with his spokesperson saying that the world cannot afford a military confrontation between the 2 nuclear-armed countries. China echoing that same call and expressing regret over the situation. Its foreign ministry says India and Pakistan will always be each other's and China's neighbors.
我们呼吁印巴双方以和平稳定的大局为重，保持冷静克制，避免采取使局势进一步复杂化的行动。我们愿同国际社会一道努力，继续为缓解当前的紧张局势发挥建设性作用。
And Japan also voiced its concerns over the escalation in conflict. It has urged both sides to resolve their issues through dialogue.
今回の事態がさらなる報復の応酬を招き、本格的な軍事紛争にエスカレートすることを強く懸念しておりまして、南アジアの平和と安定のため、インド、パキスタン双方が自制し、対話を通じて事態を安定化させることを強く求めます。
U.S. President Donald Trump says that he hopes clashes between the South Asian rivals end quickly.
No, it's a shame. We just heard about it just as we were walking in the doors of the Oval. Just heard about it. I guess people knew something was going to happen based on a little bit of the past. They've been fighting for a long time.
Coming up next on East Asia tonight, Chinese online retailers Temu and Shein see a sharp decline in sales after raising costs to deal with higher tariffs. And buybacks gaining steam at the Tokyo Stock Exchange, reaching a record level in April. Stay tuned for all the details. Hello again. You are watching East Asia Tonight, and it's time now for a business news update. China has unveiled even more support to stabilize its economy, including interest rate cuts and a major liquidity injection. This as Beijing steps up efforts to soften the economic damage caused by the trade war with the United States. CNA's Mei Wong has more from Hong Kong.
It's China's first set of stimulus since U.S. President Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs announced in April. Pan Gongsheng, the governor of the People's Bank of China, told reporters in Beijing that the reduction in the reserve requirement ratio will free up about $138 billion. The central bank hopes this will encourage banks to lend more. Another measure, reduce the interest rate on mortgage loans by 0.25 percentage points to 2.6%. This in the hope of stabilizing the real estate sector while trying to kickstart the recovery for the property market that has remained sluggish. China has described this latest round of monetary policies as thickening its safety cushion. And it comes ahead of the first face-to-face high-level trade talks between the U.S. and China in Switzerland. Analysts said Beijing is keen to show that it still has a big bag of tools ready to be deployed, with officials saying they're ready to roll out more expanded policies, improved and new measures if need be at appropriate times as China aims to achieve about 5% growth this year. While the bilateral trade talks between the U.S. Treasury Secretary and Chinese Vice Premier may not lead to major changes in the ongoing tit-for-tat tariff war, it's still a step towards both nations seeking to de-escalate this current tariff feud. Mei Wong, CNA, Hong Kong.
Well, these monetary easing measures come as U.S.-China trade talks are set to start this week, and that's according to official statements from Washington and Beijing. Well, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Trade Representative Jamieson Greer will meet with China's Vice Premier He Lifeng in Switzerland. Now, this would mark the first major discussion between the world's two largest economies since President Donald Trump's sweeping tariff rollout. Now, currently, U.S. duties on Chinese goods stand at 145% and Beijing 125% on imports from the U.S. Well, the Commerce Ministry in Beijing vowed that the country would, quote, defend justice and stand by its principles during the talks. China's foreign ministry said the talks were taking place at the request of the United States and that its position that Washington must lift tariffs was unchanged. It warned the U.S. of the possible repercussions of unilateral tariff measures. Well, the tit-for-tat tariffs have left the two nations with cripplingly high levies that have shocked financial markets and caused a sharp slowdown in bilateral trade. Well, shopping platforms Shein and Temu, for instance, are seeing double-digit sales declining in the U.S. after they raised prices to cover the costs of the new Trump tariffs. Well, according to Bloomberg's second measure, which analyzes credit and debit card data, Shein posted a 23% drop in observed U.S. sales from April 25th to May 1st, compared to the 7 days before when the price increases had not set in. Temu's sales fell 17% in the same period. Temu and Shein rely heavily on China's supply chain, and prices have soared after the U.S. hiked tariffs on Chinese goods to 145%, as mentioned. Well, the average price of Shein's top 100 beauty and health products, well, that has more than doubled compared to April 15th. Temu has also passed on nearly all of Trump's new import taxes to American consumers on products directly shipped from China. Temu now plans to ditch its model centered around cheap Chinese imports and sell only goods from local merchants in the U.S. market. All right, let's check on stocks in the Greater China region, where investors are optimistic ahead of the upcoming U.S.-China talks and Beijing's plans to roll out more stimulus measures. Glimmers of hope that a trade war might just be set to ease, giving a boost to stocks. Shanghai there up 0.8%. Hang Seng, as you can see, anyway, all three in the green. Well, the yuan under pressure following those fresh policies, which mark a shift in direction after its priorities in recent months were focused on defending the Chinese currency. Well, you can see there the Chinese currency, 0.14%, and against the USD. Now, Japanese companies accelerated share buybacks in April to a record level, and that has helped the stock market rebound from an earlier rout brought on by the U.S. imposing reciprocal tariffs against its trade partners. Companies listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange pledged over 3.8 trillion yen, or $26 billion in share repurchases during April. That's the highest ever for the month on record, and about 20% of last fiscal's total of 18.9 trillion yen, or about $132.6 billion. Well, some companies announced major buyback plans in April, including Mitsubishi, Seven & i Holdings, Shin-Etsu Chemical, and Hitachi. Buybacks boost price-to-book ratios and may even help raise dividend payouts. They support stock prices in terms of stabilizing the supply-demand balance. In early April, the benchmark Nikkei stock average plunged to its lowest level in nearly 1.5 years, trading at 31,000 level, bogged down by tariff concerns. And since then, Japanese stocks have been on a steady rebound, with the benchmark close to recovering the 37,000 level, as President Trump begins to backpedal on his tariff policies. Buybacks also helped prop up Japanese stocks. Corporations recorded a net purchase of more than $6.4 billion, increasing 186% from the previous month. Now, the EV unit of Taiwanese technology giant Foxconn has agreed in principle to develop and supply an EV model to Japan's Mitsubishi Motors. Well, this marks Foxconn's first major contract in the fast-growing EV sector. The car will be developed by Foxtron Vehicle Technologies and manufactured in Taiwan by Yulon Motor. Mitsubishi aims to sell it in Australia and New Zealand by the end of next year. Hyundai, meantime, launching a battery-powered electric vehicle specifically for the Chinese market. The Elexio is a sport utility vehicle developed with local partner BAIC Motor. The EV platform for the car took 5 years to develop, and the move is part of the South Korean car makers in China for China to the world strategy. The marquee is following other foreign firms' attempts to compete in the fiercely competitive market, which is dominated by local players. Hyundai sales in the country tumbled to just 151,000 cars last year from a peak of more than 1 million that was back in 2016. BMW says it expects to be able to ride out the impact of U.S. tariffs over the coming year, but warns of a volatile situation. The German premium car maker reported a 25% drop in net profit in the first quarter from a year ago. The firm has been struggling in key market China, owing to stiff competition from local rivals such as BYD. Its sales in China fell 17% in the first 3 months of the year. That's the worst first quarter performance since 2020. But it is sticking with its guidance for the year and expects earnings for 2025 to be level with that of 2024, driven by demand for its pricier motors. A time now for a quick break, but coming up next on East Asia Tonight, Chinese President Xi Jinping heads to Moscow for a key visit, seen as a show of support for Vladimir Putin. We'll be speaking with our China correspondent on what to expect. Plus, insights from an expert on the no-limits partnership between Beijing and Moscow. Hello there, this is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Pakistan vows to settle the score after India launched deadly missile strikes on terrorist targets inside its territory, with Islamabad calling New Delhi's move an act of war. The attack marks one of the most serious military escalations between the nuclear-armed rivals in years. The United States and China set for their first significant trade talks since their tariff standoff. This comes as Beijing unveils even more support to stabilize its economy. And a South Korean court postpones the retrial of leading opposition presidential candidate Lee Jae-myung, clearing his run for the country's top job. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has hailed what he calls resilient ties with Russia ahead of his arrival in Moscow for a 4-day state visit. Mr. Xi will meet President Vladimir Putin as Russia holds its Victory Day celebrations. Now, 28 other foreign leaders will also be attending the parade. The Chinese leader wrote in a Russian newspaper that the two countries should jointly resist any attempt to interfere with their friendship and mutual trust. The trip comes at a time of rising tensions between China and the US over trade tariffs. The Russian president is expected to rally support for his troops fighting in Ukraine as Moscow marks the 80th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. The leader has ordered a 3-day ceasefire for this occasion. China and Russia's economic ties have strengthened over the 3-year-old war with Ukraine. Moscow declared a no-limit strategic partnership days before the conflict began. But Beijing denies any involvement in the war, stressing that it supports a peaceful resolution. The US, meanwhile, is trying to push Moscow and Kyiv to put an end to the crisis, but both parties blame each other for a lack of progress. And for more, CNA's Sun Yuguan, he joins us live from Shanghai. Yuguan, first up, how significant is Mr. Xi's visit to Russia amid broader tensions and the ongoing trade war with the US?
Well, for China to have this open show of solidarity and support towards Russia at a time when Russia is still waging a war in Ukraine, a war of aggression, comes at a considerable price for China. Although weakened, Russia is still a military power with considerable weight. China wants Russia to be an ally and a counterweight against the US to create a multipolar world, one that is rather than one that is dominated by American hegemony. But Russia's invasion of Ukraine does unnerve European countries. They don't know if Ukraine is just step one of a further return to Russian domination of Eastern Europe during the Soviet times. So Chinese support for Russia at this time also unnerves them. It also unnerves countries in Southeast Asia, because if China can support a friend with territorial ambitions that run counter to international norms, it raises the question about what China intends to do about its own maritime territorial claims in the South China Sea. These doubts and questions run counter to China's interests in Europe and Southeast Asia, especially when it comes to trade. Because for China, ASEAN as a region is actually the country's top export destination. US is number 2, EU is number 3. So now with the American market essentially gone because of the tariffs, China would hope that these two giant markets can at least make up partly for the loss of the American market. As we witnessed recently, China has been on a charm offensive with the EU and ASEAN, as we saw with Xi Jinping's visit to Southeast Asia, and also the lifting of restrictions on mutual exchanges with the EU just this week. But China's moves to cultivate these two markets is eroded by concerns about its close ties with a country like Russia. That's perhaps why, in the article that you mentioned that Xi Jinping wrote to the Russian media, the Chinese president also emphasized the role that China and Soviet Union played in World War II against the aggressors, Nazi Germany and Japan's military. He wrote that in Asia, countless Chinese patriots fought against the Japanese invasion of China, while in Europe, the Soviet Red Army crushed the Nazi invaders. He also mentioned that justice would triumph over evil, and the war tribunals nailed the war criminals to the pillar of shame for all time. We know, of course, that Xi is in Russia to attend activities commemorating the 80 years since Allied victory over Nazi Germany. So his reminder is apt for the occasion. But we can also read those words as perhaps a reminder that China is supporting commemoration of a victory against aggressors rather than supporting an aggressor itself.
Okay, well, I hear what you're saying, Yuguan. But in the meantime, what can we expect in the days ahead, especially on the talks between Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin?
Well, according to a Kremlin aide, two leaders will discuss, quote-unquote, the most sensitive issues, particularly energy cooperation, including a proposed gas pipeline to China, a pipeline called the Power or Siberia 2 pipeline. This pipeline was supposed to run across Russia, and Russia proposed it years ago. But now with Europe trying to cut off the use of Russian gas because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Moscow needs to look for a new customer, and that customer is China. So China may run a rather hard bargain with Russia when it comes to this pipeline. Otelli?
All right. Many thanks for that report. CNA's Tan Yuguan in Shanghai. Well, for more insights now, let's speak with Philipp Ivanov, founder and CEO of Geopolitical Risk and Strategy Practice, and he is joining us from Melbourne. Well, thanks for being here in East Asia tonight. So I just want to talk, we heard about what Yuguan was saying, and in the event that the war in Ukraine drags on, Philipp, could that start to shift how Beijing sees its longer-term interests with Moscow?
I think China will be against any escalation, and it made it very clear to Russia that that it's against particularly any nuclear escalation, which is not at the moment on the horizon. But ultimately, I think that Beijing is pretty comfortable with where it stands. I think it's prepared to carry the risks of alienating its relationships in Europe and Southeast Asia while supporting Russia's war in Ukraine, because ultimately I think it has limited means to stop the war. And even if it has, it won't use its leverage because it doesn't want a weakened, chaotic, and defeated Russia on its border. And I also don't think that Beijing wants to see any Russia-China disagreements exploited by the United States to split their partnership. So even though I think that Beijing is generally uncomfortable with Russia's aggression in Ukraine, over the last years, it has learned to live with it and manage it. It doesn't see significant escalation on the horizon, but neither does it see any significant peace process that's coming out from the US. So I think China is quite comfortable with managing that, the risks of the Ukraine war and its relationship with Russia.
So you mentioned China is quite comfortable. It's definitely against any escalation in Ukraine. But I want to go back to this no limits partnership, right? I mean, do you see it shifting in the long run?
I think there are many layers to this relationship. Bilaterally, as you mentioned, China and Russia really value economic complementarity of their relationship. The trade is over 240 billion last year. Russia is not a big market, but it's a substantial nonetheless, particularly in light of Trump's tariffs. Russia and China are also aligned diplomatically in the UN and in other multilateral institutions. The leadership, political, strategic, and defense links are growing and already strong. The partnership allows both countries to concentrate on their respective security challenges. So China is looking east on Asia, where it's in direct competition with the United States in the sort of maritime theater of the Indo-Pacific, while Russia is focused on its war in Ukraine and by default, its confrontation with Europe. But also, I guess, longer term and strategically, China and Russia are aligned in building this multipolar global order in which the US power is diluted. And they're very aligned in that, interested to dilute the US influence and US power. And, so despite that, I think not everything is going well. Of course, there are, disagreements. There is a competition between China and Russia in their sort of spheres of interest, from the Arctic to Central Asia. Of course, Moscow resents being an economic minor partner in the relationship. And they're both fiercely independent powers. But there may be some moment in the future when China and Russia present a more formidable challenge to each other than to the West or to the United States. But I think at the moment, on economic front, on strategic and defense front, as well as globally and strategically, the benefits of their partnership far outweigh the risks. And so I think we will see the continuation of this partnership for some years to come.
Right. And I want to bring in North Korea to this sort of complex relationship, because we can see Pyongyang, getting closer with Russia on the military front. How does this add a new layer of complexity to the whole China-Russia dynamic, and especially when we look at the bigger East Asia picture?
I think China is, in my estimation, is quite irritated by that relationship, partly because it creates another level of complexity for what is already a very difficult security situation in Asia as well as in Ukraine. But it also, the signs are that Russia has been very careful not to antagonize China in its relationship with Korea. President Putin wants to show that it has other partnerships in the region and beyond, not just China, that it's not dependent solely on the Chinese support. But it also has been very careful to make sure that any significant developments in the North Korea-Russia relationship have at least some visibility to China. So because China is far more important partner. So I think Beijing again has learned to live with this challenge. It will monitor where it's going, but at the moment I think it's learned to manage it, and it's learned to sort of accept that not everything will go smoothly in its relationship with Russia, and that Beijing should be prepared that sometimes Russia will continue to be a fairly belligerent state.
So, President Xi, he's going to be holding talks with, President Putin, and they're probably looking to tighten their economic, energy ties, that sort of thing, especially when they're facing Western sanctions. Is it clear to you who stands to gain more and also at what cost?
I believe that Beijing is going to gain much more than Russia from this. I think it's very clear, particularly in the energy relationship, that Beijing has exploited the fact that China or Russia is isolated from its major markets in Europe. And it has been doing it quite consistently and strategically since 2014, when the first set of sanctions hit Russia in the aftermath of its invasion of Crimea. So at the moment, it's a very asymmetric economic as well as strategic relationship. Russia is highly dependent on its core exports of technology and equipment from China, and of course, it's dependent on China for its energy trade. And so I think China will maximize the benefits of this situation to negotiate the best possible price for Russian oil and gas, because simply Russia doesn't have a lot of leverage and a lot of options for its energy trade. Having said that, I think beyond that kind of transactional relationship, beyond that quite mercantilist approach by China, I think there are some very deep strategic alignment between Beijing and Moscow, and symbolism of this visit is quite important. So I think Beijing will be very careful to ensure that the economic, the commercial, the transactional part of the relationship doesn't overshadow the symbolism of President Putin and President Xi standing together, shoulder to shoulder on the Red Square, celebrating the 80th anniversary of Russia's victory in the Second World War. They're both very astute students of history, and symbolism is just as important as the oil and gas price.
Although Beijing does still stand to gain a lot more than Russia. Well, thanks so very much for your analysis. Really enjoyed that. Philipp Ivanov, founder and CEO of Geopolitical Risks and Strategy Practice. Well, turning our attention to South Korea now, the Seoul High Court has delayed the retrial of Democratic Party presidential frontrunner Lee Jae-myung, who is accused of violating election laws. The hearing that's originally set for 15th of May will now take place on 18th of June instead, weeks after the country elects a new president. The court says the move ensures fairness as Lee is seen to lead the snap election race. Polls now placing his support above 50%, despite facing 5 trials on 12 charges. If elected, Lee would be immune from prosecution. Trailing behind is independent candidate and former Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. Han said today that he won't register to run unless he can merge his campaign with ruling People Power Party candidate Kim Moon-soo, meaning one of them will have to eventually drop out of the race. Conservatives argue a merger is their only shot at victory. But Kim, accusing the party of a sham primary, has suspended his campaign until leadership makes a clear decision. Party leaders are pushing for a merger by the May 11th deadline. Polls show Han with the edge in a unified Conservative run. Well, time now for another break, but coming up on East Asia tonight, a centuries-old election process will soon begin as Catholic cardinals prepare to choose the next pontiff. A look into why this year's conclave could be the least predictable in decades. Plus, business and tech leaders discuss investment opportunities in new growth areas at GIC's forum in the US. Cardinals from around the world have joined a special mass at St. Peter's Basilica ahead of the conclave to elect a new pope. Well, Cardinal Giovanni Battista presided over the service. After the mass, the cardinals will gather in a Sistine Chapel for the first vote. No pope has been elected on the first day of a conclave for centuries. This means voting could go on for days until one cardinal secures 2/3 of the vote to become the 267th pontiff. The longest conclave lasted more than 1,000 days, nearly 3 years, back in the 13th century. And all eyes will be on the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. Black smoke means no decision has been reached, while white smoke will mean a new pope has been elected. Ollie Barrett tells us what to expect with a papal conclave set to convene to choose its next leader.
There's always a sense of uncertainty at an event like this because no one really knows exactly how it's going to unfold, how long it will take and who will be the next pontiff over the coming days, depending on how long this process lasts. The cardinals will be only in the Sistine Chapel and otherwise in their residence. This is what they are concentrating on until they have reached a decision on a new pope, and they will have no contact with the outside world while all of this is taking place. There are many within the church who hope that they see what they would believe would be a progressive figure, a liberal figure in the way that many viewed Francis's papacy, but there are also strong conservative voices within the church, many of them from parts of the world like Asia and Africa and the United States, who believe that perhaps Francis moved the church too far towards some progressive liberal positions and would like to see something more traditional and conservative this time around. But social issues, speaking out on political issues, the kind of things that Pope Francis was known for, may well be the kind of thing that we see in the next candidate.
For more of our coverage on the Pope's succession, do log on to CNA.Asia for stories including this one on who might potentially be the successor to Pope Francis. Now, Asia's energy transition is at a turning point, and the scale of investment needed is staggering. Well, my colleague Roland Lim was at Ecosperity 2025 at Marina Bay Sands, and he spoke to Ricardo Politi, Regional Vice President for Asia Pacific at the International Finance Corporation, to find out how Asia is investing into its green transition.
We cannot deny that there is a commitment from everybody. It is just recent, 2 weeks ago, that we closed the first green bond financing in Nepal. It's just 6 months ago or 8 months ago that we closed the first green bond in Mongolia. So what I can see is that private sector and public sector alike are still moving forward. I honestly cannot think of any country in the region which is just saying, okay, this was a trend and I'm not going to pursue it anymore. On the contrary, I see that Asia see energy transition as key to their competitiveness and to the creation of jobs.
How can local banks then, and as well as institutional investors in Asia, play a bigger role in terms of financing the transition? I mean, what's holding them back right now?
Listen, local banks and local financial intermediaries in general, I think they have a big role to play, because it would be very difficult for big institutions to reach out to MSMEs. It's very, very difficult. We can only do it through financial intermediary. I have to say that we have many of our issuances are supporting local banks or local intermediaries to increase the volume of funding they can use for MSMEs and to help them in their energy transition and also in their gender, for example. I think that what global investors can do, global investors can educate, in my opinion, is very important, and get educated in the fact that these are great financial instruments. They need always to be improved, like every financial instrument, but that they are there for the good reasons. They provide a good return, and in the reality, they are very key to the growth of the economies and to job creation.
Well, artificial intelligence has produced some of the most impactful technological breakthroughs in recent years, changing the way we interact with machines and the way companies do business. Well, at a forum convened in San Francisco by Singapore's GIC, tech leaders and businesses came together to explore technological disruption and innovation. Ira Spitzer with this report.
Here at day one of this two-day event, the head of Singapore's sovereign wealth fund, GIC, kicked things off with a discussion about the fund's strategy of identifying and investing in transformative technology startups and what goes into that process. And, of course, artificial intelligence is at the heart of those efforts.
I'm also here to learn how AI is better, faster, and cheaper. I need to know more of that, so that we can invest better, so that we can be more helpful to our portfolio companies.
The speakers here include representatives from major companies like OpenAI and Databricks. I caught up with Databricks CEO Ali Ghodsi and asked him about what he thinks is in store for AI development and the impact of the technology on the businesses integrating AI.
I think the AIs are very good, and I don't think we're going to get a 10x better improvement on the AIs. But the impact they will have in the world, I think we're at the 1%. So I think most of the impact is ahead of us.
In the audience were representatives from a number of large firms here to try and get a steer on where things are going and how they can position themselves to leverage AI to better serve their customers and gain a competitive advantage. The event is strongly focused on enterprise solutions, complex issues like data governance, and gradually handing over core business functions like customer service and software development to AI. The ongoing development of open source, large language models like China's DeepSeek has also had a profound impact on the space and is likely to shape how different countries invest in the technology.
We saw DeepSeek last year, and then we saw the Qwen 3 came out a couple of weeks ago. We have had Llama 4. This is going to continue like that. And I think countries will get in and start investing money in making sure that their nation can, have a big say in open source large language models.
Much of the action here happens outside of the official events where attendees can discuss common interests and challenges, as well as forge relationships that will continue long after the event wraps up. Ira Spitzer, CNA, San Francisco.
And before we go, China's first Corgi police dog has gotten itself into a little bit of trouble again, this time for stealing a child's snack. Fu Zai, a 1.5-year-old Corgi pup who works for the Weifang Public Security Bureau, was caught in the act while on patrol. The canine was punished in January for napping on the job, with a mistake causing it to lose its year-end bonus of snacks and toys. Following the latest incidents, Fu Zai faced disciplinary action, but netizens leaped to the defense of the canine crime fighter, who called on the police to increase its rations. Fu Zai's handler made amends with the victim, giving her back 2 sausage snacks in return. The child generously shared one with the canine. Well, the Welsh Corgi has attracted much online attention since it made its debut last October. Aside from patrolling duties, Fu Zai also serves as an ambassador against scams and to promote road safety. And that does it for Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Thanks for watching.